Today's webinar is a reflection on the 2025 ACLS Museum as a Sacred Space retreat in Washington, D.C. The retreat included visits to two strikingly different museums, the US Holocaust Museum and the National Museum of the American Indian, as well as the National Cathedral. Whether you were able to attend or not, this is an opportunity to share about some of what we experienced in this valuable time of retreat. Hopefully, we will all find insights into what we learned that we might take forward in our work. Our panel today consists of 4 ACLS members and a moderator, all of whom attended the retreat. They are Brian Faust, AIA, architect and founder of Faust Architecture, an architecture firm located in San Francisco, specializing in small-scale retail, residential, and sacred spaces. George Hoselman, liturgical consultant, liturgical artist, and current president of ACLS. His studio has been creating liturgical art of creative design and enduring quality since 1989. Amanda Iglesias, AIA, architect, curator, and liturgical consultant in New York City and new member of ACLS. Margaret Adams Parker, known as Peggy, liturgical artist working in sculpture, painting, and printmaking, and theological educator at Virginia Theological Seminary, a seminary of the Episcopal Church. She serves on the ACLS board. Our moderator today is Sister Marilyn Morgan, RSM, liturgical design consultant from San Francisco and head of the webinar committee. Welcome, panel.
I think I'm supposed to start off, Marilyn.
Yes, you are, please.
Okay, so I'm just going to give you a sense of the theme. We didn't just go and look, but we started with the fairly well accepted assertion among art critics and historians that today's art museum is the new sacred space. And not that worship takes place there, but that our behavior as we enter and move through a gallery has a ritual quality. We're quiet, we're reverent, we're attentive. So when Gail and I were discussing the theme for the retreat, we wondered what our members might learn for our own work from the design of these museums. Not ones such as the National Gallery of Art, which are built to house a diverse collection, but a museum designed to tell a story. And we reluctantly decided we couldn't visit the African American Museum of History, Art, and Culture since it is packed with people, and you really can't navigate there as a group. Instead, we visited the Holocaust Museum, the National Museum of the American Indian, and followed up the next day, as Pam explained, with a guided tour of the National Cathedral by J. Hall Carpenter, one of our distinguished members who worked there for, I'm going to get this wrong, Jay, 18 to 20 years. And so we're just going to share with you our impressions.
Thank you, Peggy. What we'd like to do is, first of all, is to briefly go through each person and ask you what was your favorite part of the retreat and what did you find most meaningful? So, George, you want to start this? Just a brief little summary.
I have a particular affection for churches, and being a medievalist, I particularly like the Gothic. So the National Cathedral was a big thrill for me.
Okay, Amanda?
I have multiple favorite aspects. I'm a new member of ACLS, so really just meeting people in person and really feeling like I found my people in the world. We're kind of a rare bird, you know, able to talk about Augustine and Rothko in the same sentence, and just the richness of conversations really filled me. And to that, you know, just experiencing beautiful places together, singing Taizé in the crypt, having lunch in the Bishop's Rose Garden, just really enjoying the beauty of the trip was the highlight.
Thank you. Brian?
Yeah, I think for me it was just the connection of getting to meet all of you again. You know, we're all across the United States, the world actually. I think there's somebody in Australia, but yeah, just getting the chance to meet all of you guys again, sit down, have these types of conversations, encourage one another, learn from one another. You know, I'll point out Ken graciously had dinner with me at the end of the thing, and we got to talk a little bit about like business and how do you develop clients and kind of that type of a kind of mentorship stuff that ACLS has been great in giving me that type of information. And so that connection of other people trying to do the same sort of thing is invaluable. And I really appreciated that about the retreat.
Thank you. Peggy, what was your favorite?
Well, I love that sense of community. And there we are in front of the cathedral and chatting. And it was lovely to see people in person and see people meet new people and see people that I've met on retreat or at the Southwest Liturgical Conference. And it was I love that picture at the cathedral. It was really wonderful to get to know those members and to share their descriptions of their work. We didn't have a work presentation, but just to talk about what they're doing and then to share the impressions of these spaces that we visited. So actually what we're going to do today will give you a snapshot of what that was like when we shared those impressions.
Thank you. And on that note, Peggy, you're up for the first question about, could you contrast how you felt the two museums moved you through the spaces?
Well, the Holocaust Museum is designed through its structure and its building materials to make the visitor feel uncomfortable. And I'm sure my architects can talk about that more in a more informed way than I can. And but the exhibits themselves compel you along a defined path. You're going through darkened rooms with low ceilings. There are just 2 points of relief where you come out without an exhibit. One midway and the other at the end, where the narrow corridors open up and you enter this open space filled with light in the Hall of Remembrance, I think it's called. And there it is there. So that's a wonderful contrast between the corridor and the Hall of Remembrance. The National Museum of the American Indian is surrounded by plantings. It's got flowing water outside, and you're invited rather than forced inside into this oculus, what's called the oculus, this huge dome, indoor dome. It's really reminiscent of the Pantheon that echoes the openness of the outside. And so it's almost like indoor and outdoor are merge in that architecture. So there's a totally different way that you experience the space and walk through it.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any other thing they'd like to share about these two museums?
There's the Museum of the American Indian. One of the things that I noticed was that on the exterior, you have elements that reference nature, whereas the Holocaust Museum focuses on the impersonal industrial aspect of basically human destruction. And I'll probably talk about that a little bit more when we talk about line and curve a little later on.
I'll just add to that, given the siting, Museum of the American Indian is fully in the round. It's on its own block. You can see it from multiple perspectives, whereas the Holocaust Museum is very much embedded into the streetscape, and it's a very interior space. It's designed to sort of fit in from the exterior, but then interrupt once you move inside and have a totally different impression.
Okay, the next question is Brian's. How did the two museums affect you with the contrast of darkness and light?
Yeah, I think like many museums, you know, sometimes when you go into the exhibit space, sometimes the lighting is a little bit darker, it's a little bit less versus kind of the public spaces where it might be brighter. But in the Holocaust Museum in particular, I don't necessarily have a good photo of this, but when you went into some of the exhibit spaces, it was kind of needlessly dark, which I think matched the weight of the subject matter which you were engaging with. And so it was a really interesting play on using light and contrasted darkness and light to help you focus in on what you were doing or what you were seeing. You saw this as well in the American Indian Museum when you walked into, say, the exhibit on American Indians in advertising, or they had a section on kind of the treaties and the history of the US's engagement with the Indians. But then you would kind of come out of those into these areas of light that were kind of a little bit of a relief. And it's just interesting to me that how lightness and darkness can be used as a tool by us to help shape and focus people's attention on things. Yeah.
By the way, I just wanted to comment that the picture that you're looking at is a room full of shoes.
Yeah.
You might not be able to tell that if you have not seen it. Anybody else want to talk about the contrast of darkness and light?
The one thing that I just want to add to Brian's description of that use of light and dark is that the Museum of the American Indian has a set of prisms partway up the oculus, so that at all times of day, if the sun is shining, there's a rainbow that's cast someplace on the floor and on that ceiling. So that's just a real bringing that outdoor light inside.
Okay. Anyone else have any other comments on light and darkness?
One of the interesting things that I found in the Holocaust Museum was you go through these dark passages that are very, very industrial, very harsh, very rectilinear. But periodically you open into an area that's a little more lit. And even there, you don't entirely escape the darkness until the very end at the place of memory, which is supposed to be a meditative and contemplative space. But even here, it's still rectilinear, but it is beautifully lit. It is bright and vibrant, but the darkness is still present. It's pushed into the corners, into the side. But to me, there's a sense of, yes, there is light, there is hope, but it struggles to keep the darkness at bay. And I thought that that was a particularly poignant aspect of this particular space at the end.
I might add a comment. I just noticed that the triangular shapes and the lower part are pointing upward, so it's all directing you up. It's not contained in the downward space.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Okay. Go ahead.
One note is that the darkness is conducive to privacy. So when you're engaging very difficult content, subject matter, I think it's important for each person to be able to digest that in their own way without feeling observed, because some of it is just so horrifying.
That's very powerful.
That is a very good point.
Thank you, Amanda.
So, Amanda, in what ways did the two museums give you the opportunity to think and talk about things that disturbed you?
Yeah, I think on that note, Brian, if you want to go back to the previous slide, just reflecting on the magnitude of the Holocaust, the scale of the atrocity can quickly become abstract. It's hard to conceive of the sheer numbers we're dealing with, but the specificity of shoes being a mound, there's stories attached, there's people with real lives attached to these objects. There's, I think, an important care with which the story is told through the objects themselves that don't lose the individuality and the specificity, but still convey the magnitude and the horror of the scale of what we're talking about. So there were, obviously we have the shoes, we have next to it really thousands, hundreds of images from a village that has since been wiped off the face of the earth. There's piles of discarded eyeglasses, piles of passports, little booklets that are given to every person. So you kind of journey alongside the narrative of a single individual when you walk in. There's hours of footage that have been captured, whether it's video or photography. Walls inscribed with the names of villages long gone. There's a strong presence of absence in this museum. Even a pile of desecrated Torah scrolls that even itself just speaks to the violence through the objects themselves. So I was reflecting on the verse in Psalm 23. Yea, though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. You're journeying through the valley of the shadow of death, and it's uncanny. It's an uncanny valley because of how these objects are put together. It's just, you don't come across these objects in any other way, in any other setting. So that is definitely a very curatorial decision that is powerful. Whereas the Museum of the American Indian does speak of a different kind of story that is also full of evil and violence, but it's a different museum that attests to a people that's still present with us and tells the story of who they are today. Yes, what they've come through, but also how they've prevailed against all odds and how they're flourishing in particular ways. So celebrating parts of their traditions, such as tapestry and weaving and pottery, and the kind of beauty that still, while dwindled in numbers, still exists with us. So it's a very different tone. That's not one of absence, but very much of presence, if you know where to look.
Could I make a comment then?
Absolutely.
I lived in Washington I was in Washington when that museum was built. And our local rabbi, a conservative rabbi, who then went on to become the head of a big interfaith organization. So an important voice in the Jewish community. And he reflected to me and the concerns of some people in the Jewish community that this museum that only commemorates the genocide was a lost opportunity to tell the story. No, I mean, the Holocaust needs to be remembered, but also they regretted the fact that the museum did not also tell the story of the Jews, their history, their contributions. And what Amanda said is absolutely right, is that the native peoples have experienced their own genocide, just not in a concentrated period of time, but over centuries, displacement, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. But they invite us into a vision of hope. And they quite specifically say, we want people to know we are still here. And so that, I think, was I had forgotten about Rabbi Jack's comment until this question came up, and I think it's it's not that the Holocaust Museum is wrong, and there's certainly critics who disagree with the rabbi, but it's an interesting perspective on the difference between those two museums.
Those are good points. Where I live here in Arkansas was a staging area on the Trail of Tears, and it definitely does not have the impact that the Holocaust does. And I think that because in the Holocaust Museum, the immediacy, the personal connection with objects from the people who live there, the photographs, the shoes, etc., uh, and the fact that an advanced technological society turned its entire infrastructure to extermination has an immediacy that the genocide and the ethnic cleansing against the Native Americans doesn't have, because we don't have these very personal connections with that. And I definitely appreciate, Peggy, what you're saying about the criticism of the rabbi, because the Holocaust Museum, I mean, it could have explored the same aspect of Judaism that the Native American Museum did, and the Native American Museum could have explored the same horror that the Holocaust Museum did. And I think, though, that the impact of the profound personal connection with real people that you experience in the Holocaust Museum is important for that particular subject. And the Native Americans, uh, I think that they're in their context, um, the emphasis on life and survival and stuff, I think was very valuable.
Anyone else like to add something? Brian, you have any reflections on that?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, moving right along, we want to talk about how the use of straight lines and curved lines conveyed a message. And George, I'd like you to lead this off.
Okay. Um, Brian, can you pull up that the next one, I think? There we go. Now, admittedly, that's on the right. There is the back entrance to the Holocaust Museum, but line here is used to create a very industrial, a very hard-edged, rectilinear. There's nothing soft about this, and uh, as was said earlier, it's intended to create a level of discomfort. Um, Even, the central image at the entrance is reminiscent of European train stations, and the space is technically filled with light, but that light is filtered through this harsh grid work, and one feels in like they're in a cage. The sculpture outside the entrance there has the impression of destruction, of the ruin that comes at the end of the whole thing. Um, and let's look at the next slide of the Native Americans. The curves and the flow is comforting. It's embracing. Uh, you've got a space filled with light, but even here, the curved lines, the circular aspect creates a completely different feel in that atrium than, say, even the meditation room at the Holocaust Museum. The curves uh, bespeak of nature, you get the impression of the cliffs and bluffs of the Southwest, particularly on the exterior there, and there's more nature in it. There's trees on the outside. There's the flowing water. There's natural stone. And so it does create a completely different atmosphere. The softness of curves versus the harshness of lines and angles.
Would someone like to add to that in their comments?
There's a beautiful moment in the food court, which has you're sitting sort of at the level of the water that's cascading outside, and under the heft of this massive building above you. And it's another sort of moment of celebrating the specificity of these cultures through cuisine, and it's a place to linger. Whereas obviously the Holocaust Museum does not have a food court. People do not, want to be there beyond the time that is allocated for it. So I think that's another example of hospitality through even just the presence of a cafe that is very busy every time I'm there.
I'm glad you mentioned the mass and the weight of the Native American Museum, because that is a huge mass up there. Yet it doesn't feel oppressive. It's lifted. It feels uplifting. It drawn into the heavens, into the sky.
Peggy, can you give some insight into some of the things that you noticed about the outside and the placement of, say, the stones and things that you had pointed out? The four corners?
Oh, I can certainly, do you want me to talk to that, about that?
Yeah, a little bit, sure.
Okay, because one of the things that, and I was going to mention later, but I can certainly mention now, that was so striking to me were the commonalities between how the Native American Museum was designed and constructed and how we approach building a church. So they were aligned, they aligned it with the points of the cardinal points, the points of the compass. They actually went and got rocks for the north from Canada, one from Chile, I think, one from Hawaii, and one from the East Coast here. And those rocks were placed at the cardinal points. And when they went to the quarry, the whole process of discussing and planning was imbued with prayer. They would always have native prayer services, the corn pollen, and they prayed over those rocks at the quarries. And I mean, all the people in the quarries had never seen anything like this. So they're there praying before they dug up the rocks, and then they bring them back, and then they put them in exactly the same alignment that they were in the spot from which they were removed. And it was just very moving to realize that this was the process that they went through. They have great respect for their elders, and they always, the guiding principles of this museum are shared by many Native cultures, and as they want to reach consensus before they act. And so it was lovely to read, very beautiful to read about that whole process of designing, and how it's related and embedded in the earth, and so that's.
Thank you.
Answered your question.
Okay, how and why do you think the reflection areas in both museums is an important space? And Brian is going to lead us off on this one.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious kind of thing to think about that is just having a moment to pause and take a breath. Both subject matters are pretty weighty, and I think the goal of any museum is to get people to think about things outside of themselves, reflect upon history, how that impacts the days that we live in now, thinking about the past. What I also find interesting is that both of them kind of did it in slightly different ways. The Holocaust Museum is ultimately linear in form, although it's not a linear building, but you start at one end and then you end in the reflection. Well, this space here that we have here. And in the middle of that kind of linear pattern, you have these two areas, which I don't believe I have a photograph of, where you were going into the dark spaces, dealing with the issues of the Holocaust and the horrors that we were seeing there. And then twice you would kind of step into these areas that had, they were filled with light. They had very simple kind of modern contemporary art. And it was quite a contrast, kind of like a palette cleanse to kind of what you were seeing before. But then you kind of picked up and you moved back into the linear trail of which you were going on to end in this area. What's interesting about the Native American Museum is that kind of core, this kind of circular space was the area where you got that sort of reflection area. But that was also kind of the circulation space between the two, or between, I think there was 4 floors. So you were kind of coming in and out of this larger kind of reflection communal area to have that and then go back and forth, rather than it kind of being linear as in the Holocaust Museum. But what was also interesting is the Holocaust Museum, everything was quiet. Even when you were in the two reflection areas, you still felt the need to be kind of quiet and reserved. Whereas there was much more life in the reflection area of the Native American Museum, where you're kind of coming in and out of this. Not that you couldn't talk about what you were seeing, and we did talk about that a little bit in there, but it still felt very somber in those areas where you had this moment of reflection. Whereas in the Native American Museum, that area felt a little bit more lifelike. It felt a little bit more engaging. You might see a kid kind of running by, and like you see in a typical museum, running away from his parents or something. So yeah, just they're kind of introducing areas of reflection in very slightly different ways, but giving you the opportunity to stop, sit down, think about what was going on before you kind of pick up and re-engage in that conversation and in that dialogue.
Brian, your comment about how in the Native American Museum, the Museum of the American Indian, how you're always where the staircase is, you can see it on that left slide, so that always as you're moving up, you're actually just at the edge. You're always in that oculus or around the edge. And I hadn't thought about it that way, but so it's not like you come into it. It's like the core that you're always circling around as you go up and come back down. So I think that was a lovely observation about that space. Thank you.
The use of the circular shape in that atrium too, you're guided toward that center, but at the same time, the center of the center, that wood floor, if I remember correctly, it's almost like that's sacred ground. You don't want to walk across there because it's held in reverence. And I think that that's interesting, that at the center of all things is this transcendent core that just automatically makes us step back and pause and reflect in honor for that which is.
Okay, let's move on to the next question, which is, name 2 things that were particularly significant for you in both spaces and why. And Peggy is going to spearhead this one.
Okay. Well, I think those shoes haunt every visitor to the Holocaust Museum. And it is, I've never talked to anyone who didn't, you know, they have forgotten everything else and they remember those shoes. And it's just, it's huge. I think it's, I don't know that photo, maybe that's just half of it. It's like it's 25 feet long, maybe by 8 feet deep. The architects will maybe have a better idea, but it is just such, it's filled, as Amanda was saying, with that tangible reminder of the Jews and others as well as Jews, but mostly Jews, who removed those shoes before they walked into the gas chamber.
Mhm.
And it is so powerful. It's like the glasses or the eyeglasses. There were not so many of those, but these objects that people wore. So these lives, these people that own these shoes, and so that is just an indelible memory, I think, for anyone who's been there. So I'm just going to mention the one um at the Museum of the American Indian, and George's point, I think, is very important, that that is actually, although I said that museums are not intended to be a worship space, that actually is intended for indigenous spiritual practices. And there are places that are set aside where we as outsiders cannot go. There's one outside, there's a sort of circular place. And the idea that, and they have ceremonies, um, and so that there is that spiritual element that's of current indigenous practice that is built into the design of the museum. And that's partly the the impetus behind that outside inside, where you go back and almost like they merge in some way, or they continue into one another, whereas there's certainly a sense of spiritual remembrance in the um in the Holocaust Museum, but it's different from an active worshiping observant community. And I've already talked about all the spiritual practices that went into the design and the execution. So those things were very significant for me.
Would anyone else like to share what was significant for them?
The atrium at the Museum of the American Indian is a space that just sticks in my very being, uh, for reasons that Peggy just articulated, the sense of light. There is no one person or group of people who can dominate that space because you're arranged in a circle. You're in the midst of light. Everything comes back to the center and reaches up to the heavens, and you've got this beautiful unity between heaven and earth, so to speak, between all the people who are arranged in a circle around it, who are sitting there, even the people who are viewing the exhibits on the upper floors. Like I think, Brian, you were saying, you're still at that atrium around that perimeter stair, etc. The sense of permanence and in durability that is the emphasis on nature and the stone and water, etc. So there's a unity even between humanity and nature, between heaven and earth there. One of the things that truly strikes me in the Holocaust Museum is that entrance area, that atrium type space with that photograph in the center. Being an individual who has slept on benches in German train stations, I mean, I look at that and I stand in that space and I can smell the diesel and the creosote and hear the trains and all of this other kind of stuff. And in spite of its industrial character, there's a fragility to it. And to me, that speaks of, yes, this was a horror, but it is a horror that we can overcome, that the darkness does not have to uh, crush us. We can break this and return to the light and to nature and to each other, etc. So those are the two things that really have stuck with me.
Well, that leads us into the next question, George, and it's you. What did you find most interesting about the National Cathedral?
Well, like I said, I've got a background in medieval art history, and I love Gothic. I love Romanesque. I love all of these ancient forms of architecture. But what I really found most revelatory, and I've seen this in a lot of churches, particularly in Europe, is that this is not a museum piece. This is a living, breathing, sacred environment. That it's not just people in the 12th and 13th century with their Gothic vaulting and fan vaulting that have a lock on the sacred, but it is the genius of our own time. There is it's always ancient, always new. There's this traditional architecture, or what we associate with traditional architecture. It's important to remember that when Gothic first emerged, it was the radical new modernity, and in many ways, it connects with modernist architecture, where you see the structure, architectural honesty that you get from Mies van der Rohe. Uh, and go to the next slide, Brian. Yeah, you've got this very traditional, let's say, uh, uh, portal there at the entrance with the trumeau and the doors and the tympanum, etc. But the art in this tympanum is very contemporary. It's not your 13th century, judgment scene. It's the creation itself. That middle image with the Ecce Homo, the suffering Christ, is still radiant, but it's also a very contemporary thing. The faith is alive here. And it transcends any particular time frame. Same holds true with that crucifix. That crucifix on the right is probably one of my favorite pieces in the entire cathedral because of its contemplative setting. Ironically, it's just in a stairwell, but there's something that draws you in. I couldn't help but notice that when we passed that, virtually everybody stopped and took pictures of it and spent some time looking at it. So it's always ancient, always new. That the genius of the past is blended beautifully with the genius of our own time, and it speaks of an openness to the future. Uh, yes. Is there another picture from there? Oh, uh, yeah. Well, I'm going to say this about that middle window. That was the thing that I wanted to see because that window transcends even our humanity. At the center of that window is a moon rock brought back by, I think, Apollo 11, and it was incorporated into this incredible window. So it's the entire cosmos is embraced in this space. Uh, and I'm going to stop there.
All right. Well, we need to talk about what takeaway experiences can be applied to our work in churches? And everyone is invited to talk on this, but Amanda's going to lead us off in this one.
I think just to piggyback on those beautiful reflections, George, of just we are people of a shared story, and part of our work is to make visible the ancient things of our story for the future and reflect on who we are today. Where are we in this unique convergence of time, of place? But also do something with good ambition for the 21st century and beyond in the same spirit as those who have come before us. You know, we don't profess a vague spirituality. We profess a table, a cup, bread, wine, water, you know, elemental things that have real matter associated with them. And our work in churches is an opportunity to enter afresh into like the simple but ancient immutable truths that we all profess, and do a new thing apart that makes sense of the greater historical whole. And I think these images are a beautiful example of different styles and techniques and crafts that have come together to do a fresh thing for our time and beyond. And I'd be curious to hear everyone else's thoughts.
I mean,
Sometimes,
for me,
oh, Brian, you
sorry.
go first.
Oh, sorry. I think for me, it was interesting and refreshing to see that people are willing to think about and engage in difficult things. You know, these are two very popular museums in our nation's capital that are telling stories that are subversive to kind of our government right now and what we're thinking about. And thinking about that with regards to sacred space, it's, yeah, you know what? People are willing to consider humanity, consider fragility. One of the things that I love about our Catholic brothers and sisters is most Catholic churches have a crucifix up there rather than just a cross. You know, willing to put hard truths in front of people and say, "Hey, consider this. Look at this." And even as we delve into, you know, the art that could populate and fill out a church space, you know, what art are you picking to have people reflect upon, and how can you have them engage in difficult topics and consider that and think about it? You know, these two museums in particular show us that people are actually willing to think about those things, and so that was encouraging to see that and to know that.
Thank you, Brian and Amanda. Those are wonderful concluding thoughts. You know, we often say you can have valid worship anywhere. I mean, there are churches that meet in middle school cafeterias. There are churches that meet in places that are not at all aesthetically pleasing. And that's good. And that we can worship outside. But while we can worship in any space, it's so instructive to feel when you walk into these spaces that they inform how we feel and how worship would be conducted in that space. So there's spaces that by their nature are contemplative. There's some that are mournful. There's some that are radiant and joyous. And I think that I mean, I'm not building churches, but I'm certain that if I had a voice in building one, or I would keep this in mind, that that what a that these spaces help inform the worship that goes on in them. So
There's an aspect of the call to conversion and reconciliation that I think is easy to overlook when we want to pretend that it didn't exist or didn't happen. And if a church becomes a museum piece to a particular era in the past and creates an artificial golden age of the past, I think that it fails as a church because all of us come to church to become church with flaws, with brokenness, with pain and suffering that we need to be, from which we need to be healed. And as societies, when we deny our failings, when we deny the darkness in our own past, in our own lives, we cease to be capable of authentic conversion. Uh, and this turning away from darkness and moving toward light, uh, you know, bending the arc of the universe toward justice uh, is, I think, a really critical point. And I think that the Holocaust Museum does that in forcing viewers to pass through the horror and then come to the light at the end. The Native American Museum does that by celebrating, you know, the beauty of nature and light, etc. at the beginning, but a reminder there is darkness here and we can overcome it. And the church itself, that every generation has its things for which it needs forgiveness, but at the same time, every generation has contributed beauty and truth and hopefully has taken us further on the road to progress to this new creation, I guess you would say.
I think it's time for us. This has been a wonderful conversation. Are there any questions that people would like to ask our panel or
This
offer an
isn't,
opinion?
Marilyn, this isn't so much a question for the panel, but I was on the retreat. I think it was essential that we went to the National Cathedral. My takeaway from the museums, one of the takeaways was the contrast between nature and a focus on nature and the natural, the created order, and the contrast in the Holocaust Museum of the man-made potential for man-made destruction. And I thought it was very helpful then to see in the National Cathedral a very man-made creation that is still grounded in light and hope and future and respecting natural material and natural light and natural or human endeavor. And I think if it were had just been the two museums, the contrast is helpful to see natural versus controlled, and the effect of man-made versus natural environment. And the cathedral kind of pulled that together in a sacred space, a functioning sacred space that showed the best of both.
Thank you, Paul.
Marilyn,
Uh-huh.
is it possible to go back to the slides?
Sure, Brian.
Sure.
Which one?
There was one a few back that had the Museum of American Indian, that had the floor of the rotunda and the ceiling, and then the outside. There are all three images in a row. A couple more.
This one?
That one there, yeah. As I listened to all of your reflections, and I was with you on this retreat, it was a marvelous experience, and I was remembering how comfortable I felt at the Museum of the American Indian, and I was just reflecting on why. And as I was looking at these three images sort of all together here, I was thinking that the one on the left reminds me of the kivas that I see at the pueblos here in the Southwest. The one in the center, that ceiling, the way the ceiling sort of steps up, is reminiscent of the Navajo Hogan structure, roof structure. And on the right, and I didn't even feel this when I was there, but it just struck me very powerfully that that's like the cliff dwellings that we see here in the Southwest. And so I've been immersed in this culture and this architecture for 30 years now, and it just felt very, very comfortable. And I wasn't even so aware of it when I was present there, but to hear your reflections, it made me think that part of what I think our churches can do, as Amanda mentioned, we're telling our story, but also I think reflecting the place in which the church is built and the culture in which the church is built. And just anecdotally, we had a project here quite a few years ago now, proposed in the Archdiocese of Santa Fe. And when our liturgical commission reviewed it, it was a basilica that came from, ancient Rome and plopped down in the New Mexico desert. And it just felt very, very out of place. And we raised that concern and basically got brushed aside. So they built their basilica. But to this day, that building feels foreign to this land and this place and this culture. So I think there's something very important about recognizing place and honoring place. And they did that beautifully in the process, even with the Museum of the American Indian. So I just wanted to mention that. And then also to highlight Amanda's comment or her noticing the hospitality of the cafe at this location. And here in New Mexico, when we visit a pueblo on a feast day, as a guest, you're invited into the homes of members of the pueblo, residents of the pueblo, to sit down at their dining room table and share a meal. And they just process people in and out there. And so the hospitality is kind of overwhelming. So that even that, cafe reflects part of the culture, which I think is just a beautiful, beautiful statement. So thank you.
Any other comments you'd like to make on the presentation?
It is about time for us to wrap up. It was great to see everyone today. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Marilyn and Brian, Amanda, George, and Peggy.